Good evening and welcome to the City of Pasco Council Workshop Meeting. The Council thanks you for being part of our city government, and at workshop meetings, the Council discusses issues, but no formal action is taken. Given the recent dramatic rise in COVID rates within the community and due to the size of the Council chambers and number of attendees, masks will be required for all attendees in the meeting, in person, vaccinated or not. Agenda packets are available on the City of Pasco's website at www.pasco-wa.gov/agenda. And please note that the City Council meeting may be accessed through GoToWebinar. This meeting is also being televised live on Pasco TV channel 191, on Spectrum Cable in Pasco and Richland, and is streamed on the city's Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel. This and previous council meeting video is available on the city's website. And lastly, the public may submit their comments and or questions by contacting the city manager or city clerk or using the feedback form on the city's website. And with housekeeping issues out of the way, can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Alvarado.
Present.
Maloney.
Present.
Milne.
Present.
Roach.
Present.
Serrano.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Barajas.
Mayor Pro Tem Barajas is excused tonight.
And Mayor Martinez.
Present. Thank you very much. May we all rise for the flag salute, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. Next on the agenda, we have verbal reports from council members. Does anybody want to share anything they did last week?
Councilmember Alvarado.
Yes, Councilmember Alvarado.
Just sharing, we had our Ben Franklin Transit board meeting, and all went well. We had some lively discussion around ridership and just levels of service. But all in all, they're coming, putting their annual meeting together, and we're starting to see ridership starting to pick up after, had gone down for the pandemic. But yeah, just all is well in Ben Franklin Transit.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Anyone else?
This is Councilmember Roach. And last Wednesday over Zoom was a Visit Tri-Cities strategic planning from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. We had some facilitators that did a pretty good job considering all virtual. There were a lot of objectives that came out of it that I can't share with you from memory, but just really good conversation about the overall vision of Visit Tri-Cities and the mission and how do we strategize that for the future coming years. So I can share notes with you guys and type them up, but there was quite a bit since it was a really lengthy meeting. So
Thank you.
That's all I got.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. Anyone else? Well, I would share before we get started, when we go to the next item, I was actually able to participate in a Make-A-Wish Foundation fundraiser, as I had announced last week. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was approximately $180,000 that was raised for the Make-A-Wish Foundation with the Corvette Club that a gentleman by the name of Matt Price put on, and it was cars from all over the Northwest. And it was a big crowd. I was kind of concerned, but everybody seemed to be conscious and doing the right thing and wearing the mask and those kind of things, unless they were eating, of course. But it was a great event, and it was beautiful cars. And I know that the tourism was impacted with that event because there was a lot of people there. And many of them, like I said, come from out of town. So a good event to put on for the Tri-Cities and Pasco in general. That's where the awards banquet was. And so I want to thank those people involved for this great fundraising opportunity. And so, yeah, that's what I got to share. There was one other thing, but I'll get to it later. So with that, we'll go right on to the next item on the agenda. So items for discussion tonight, we have the American Rescue Plan Act Funds Business Support Program with Pasco Chamber of Commerce. Tonight we got the Director Richa. Want to start us off with that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and evening council. The agenda item in front of you is requesting an additional up to $2.5 million to add to a previously approved $1 million to the business support program that council had initially approved back in July 6th. And I'm trying to get the PowerPoint on. Give us just a minute. Thank you. Overall, the intention of the program was to provide, of course, the business assistance grant, which our businesses are in dire need of, but also education as well, that we have identified as something that could really help our businesses in areas like accounting, compliance, business development, market analysis, inventory control, organization, and many other things that might come up between now and when the program, the education program truly starts, as well as a business portal, which would be a web portal that would help our businesses with a lot of information within there. We also estimated about 15 to 20% in administrative costs, and this is a little bit higher than what council is usually used to seeing. But the reason that we put in an estimate is because the education program, we've not had the opportunity to really work on that and see exactly what kind of administrative overheads would be required for that and what that program would look like. Usually when you're talking about education, that requires a lot of labor and effort, so that is why you see that high of a percentage. Now, these were all estimates at the time. We had a lot of unknowns. One of the biggest one is how much is the demand from the community overall, which of course depends on our ability to reach the businesses in need. So if we're not able to advertise this program to the community properly and they're not aware that it even exists, or also action of other funding partners. So if there's a lot of federal, state, and local programs that were available, then we might not have as much of a demand. And at that time, we did not know what kind of environment we were going to be in when our program was going to be in progress. Next slide, please. So the current status is that we have over 130 plus applications and more than $3 million in business grants, and that is as of September 6th. We have looked through, or Chamber of Commerce, Pasco Chamber of Commerce has looked through the applications that were received as of September 6th, and they found about 2 million of that 3 million to be easily substantiated and meeting the program criteria. Of course, those are estimates. We're trying to work through and look through the documentations and reach out to the business owners as they're reviewing those applications. So that is how that data was calculated. Of course, the fact that the Chamber and the city has not really embarked upon education or the business portal effort yet. And that is because our biggest focus has been on ensuring that the business grant program is completed. And after we have allocated all of the funds, we would be embarking upon these two different programs. Next slide. So at this point, what we've found is that there's a lot of demand in the community, and I don't think that was exactly a surprise, but it's good to know what the number is. We've also found ourselves in an environment where there really isn't very many programs in place as we speak. We've reached out, and Pasco Chamber of Commerce has also reached out to various other cities to see what they're doing. We've been doing the same thing as a city, ensuring that we're not reinventing the wheel per se, but also looking at what the other jurisdictions are doing And what we found is that a lot of the other jurisdictions are still working through the list that they have, the outreach with council and the community, and they do not really have a program in place yet. We're one of the few cities who has started on this a little bit earlier than most others, which means that we're one of the first ones to reach our communities in need. So that is why you see such a high demand. I would also say that Pasco Chamber of Commerce, as well as our Economic Development Director, have done a great job of ensuring that all of the information was out there in the community, that it reached to as many businesses as possible, and that they had the support and guidance to apply for these funds. At this time, given the fact that we are, as of last week, we're seeing almost $2 million that could be eligible for grant assistance, and very likely that amount is going to increase over the next 2 weeks that the application is going to be open. And the fact that we highly recommend that we sustain the education and the business portal effort. We are asking for council's discussion on allocating an additional $2.5 million to this program. So we're looking for a discussion at this point and a guidance. And if you feel like this is too high of a number and you would like to lower that, we would also like some guidance on how you would like for us to allocate the funding for the current program. For example, let's say that we had $3 million in eligible requests, but we only had $2 million to allocate. How would you want for us to spread that funding around? And some of the criteria, we gave that out in the staff report as well.
Thank you, Director Rita. And I will open it up for any comments or questions from the council. I did see David Gonzalez. Are you on tonight, David?
Yeah, Mike Gonzalez is here.
Oh, Mike, I'm sorry. I'm David
That's
Zabel,
okay.
Mike Gonzalez, same thing. So Mike, sorry about that. Are you, what's your take? Does he have a function in this as far as outreach to the community?
Yeah, as Mayor, as Rita mentioned, I was one of the outreach participants, and as she mentioned, the need is great. I think we did a pretty good job, I would say an excellent job of outreach. We really took a three-prong approach, which was to go in person to every single business that we could. I would say, Mayor, that I probably visited close to 50 businesses from East Pasco all the way to West Pasco in person, just explaining the parameters of how this actual grant worked. We also hit traditional media, so I spent a lot of time on TV and radio. They were very gracious in the process. And then I also worked with John Funfar on the third level of approach, which was to utilize our social media platform. So I think we certainly reached a lot of people. Colin from the Chamber was great in that approach as well. So it was definitely a collective effort, but you know, even after the process of outreach, organically people are reaching out to me as they hear by word of mouth. So it's been incredible to see the need in the community for this funding. So as I see it with my own eyes, at times it's pretty heart-wrenching. You know, just to share a story, there was a coffee shop owner in West Pasco, and she literally said, I was praying that we could get a grant, and then you showed up. So when you hear things like that, it certainly becomes heart-wrenching, and you feel like you're definitely doing the right thing for these businesses, and they certainly appreciate it.
Thank you for that report, Mr. Gonzalez. Appreciate it. I just knew you had some outreach out there, and I wanted to get your take on it. But with that, City Manager Dave Zabel.
Mayor, may I suggest it might be appropriate, Colin Hastings, the Chamber Director, has been kind of on the front lines of the intake of all the different applications and so forth that have come in. It may be appropriate now to have Colin make a few comments
Okay.
So council had to benefit that information as well.
Is Mr. Collins here tonight?
Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Collins.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Yes, this has been quite the undertaking. Before I get started, I really do want to emphasize the surprise and the effort that the city has taken by taking a real strong leadership role in moving these ARPA funds, getting into the community as quickly as we are. From my research, and Richa kind of mentioned that on the scale and the action item of activating at this point, Pasco is leading Washington State in doing something like this. So I do want to give kudos to the council for having the foresight to do this, acknowledging the need that is out there. I really want to just emphasize the importance of that and what it means to the community. That being said, the numbers that Richa shared with you were from last week, and we've had a substantial growth since that time, almost 40% growth in terms of requests, in terms of numbers. I don't have the amount of the dollar amount. So there's definitely a need, and I suspect we'll probably get some more here in the next 24 hours. The application period does close at 5 o'clock tomorrow, Tuesday, September 14th. And to be precise, 4:59 p.m. So we know that there'll be more of a need than we're able to provide. That being said, is one of the variables that we have to go in is making sure that the documentation that is being requested for applicants are complete and fulfilled. And there's been a lot of effort of helping the businesses provide the information that's needed. I mean, our goal is to make sure that we provide them the best opportunity to get a grant if they qualify. And some of those areas are in some regards pretty easy to provide. Some might take a little bit more effort. And so we've been working a lot with those businesses to provide that information so they have the best. That being said, that's why we can't really, we can only give you estimates because until the application is closed tomorrow at 4:59, we won't have a solid idea of what we're working with. But I think based on reviewing the data and providing the information for our committee, we have a committee that's formed and they'll be reviewing the applications in an anonymous sort of platform so that there's no personal information that's shared tied to a business or a name or a company. But definitely a need that is out there, and I'm happy to answer any sort of questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Appreciate your report and appreciate the work you guys are doing to run this program. So with that, council members, do you have any questions or comments?
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Martinez, and thank you, Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. Hastings for your comments as well. Really appreciate the additional context. I think it's really important that people know that this isn't just the city of Pasco just off on their own doing something. We're really trying to make sure that we take into account some of the lessons I think we learned during the CARES Act funding and the assistance we were able to provide at that time. It was a little less structured. We learned some lessons, and we got the right people on the team to get the information out there. So I'm excited about that. I guess I'm very supportive of additional assistance being provided for the businesses. So I certainly understand the need, and the fact that this has outgrown our initial estimate is good. That means that we are reaching the businesses that need assistance and need help. For the education portion and such, I guess I don't understand that as well. I kind of get the overall concept of it, but when I'm looking at our overall list of things that we would really like to fund, I think we're at somewhere over double what the money we've actually received for ARPA. And so what I'd be really interested in is if we could flesh that a little bit more and possibly maybe take it off the immediate action. I think we've got a little longer runway for that, and then start prioritizing that with the other items we have on our list, and be able to, you know, dig in, make sure that we're hitting that exactly right. We understand better what the you know, bang for the buck is. I'm supportive of the concept. I just want to make sure, because we have such a long list of ways that we've talked about helping the community, that we make sure that we rack and stack that appropriately with those, as opposed to try to rush that portion. The other portion, if the need is there, I'm very supportive of us funding the need, and as the chamber goes through and identifies who qualifies for the additional funding. So I guess that's my 2 cents. And if anyone would like to weigh in about what the education portion is, or if it makes sense for us to move, if it's okay for us to move that on, if there's any reasons to not maybe push that back, I'd be interested in hearing that. So maybe Mr. Hastings can help me out with that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I respond?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Hastings.
It's Caller Hastings, Pasco Chamber again. Councilmember Maloney, I appreciate you bringing in structure. I did overlook that, but that is one of the items that we have put a lot of emphasis in, and making sure that once all the dust settles, for that matter, is that there's an easy paper trail and audit, you know, sort of component to what we're doing, and to the point where we're tracking every sort of communication we have with businesses. Case in point, a lot of these businesses may be providing us pictures of their tax returns on their cell phone, and we want to make sure we get hardcore scan documents, and that's not just a small minority. That is a majority of what we're chasing after, from just as an example. In regards to the education grant, we're moving forward with calling it the Resiliency Business Grant. And the idea is, and especially going through this process, we saw it with the CARES grant, but now through this process of a fundamental need for a lot of businesses to have some basic foundation in their business practice structure. I'll give an example, and this is probably one of the most relatable in terms of accounting and bookkeeping. I gave you the example of you know, taking photos, or we have seen where we've had companies send us bank statements and highlight portions of the bank statement where they made a withdrawal to pay rent for June or July. And so there's a definite need, and the idea is not necessarily, obviously, to provide them a foundation, but there's going to be, just like economic economies go, there's going to be peaks and valleys. And the next one may be pandemic related, maybe it's not, but they need to, if a business has a firm foundation, they can withstand those valleys. And so with accounting as an example, and the areas that Reach touched on is accounting, inventory control, regulatory compliance, as well as market analysis and business acumen. So if we take accounting as an example, there are some businesses where literally this grant, we would offer to buy them a file cabinet and teach them how to file their, and I don't mean that really as a joke, but in some instances, a business is maybe advanced enough where we need to get them QuickBooks. And so we'll buy them QuickBooks and then provide the training. And at the end, when they demonstrate an increase in knowledge and business productivity and acumen on that, then they have a grant at the end. So kind of a reward. And I think there's especially going through this process, there's definitely a need for that in our area. And it obviously will help the business owner, but it will help the community and those that are employed by those businesses for stability as well as growth. And once you have a good foundation, you can grow. And so I think all this is a good process to get through that. Having said all that, there's a need right now. And so I understand your thought process. This Resiliency Business Grant is definitely a long play type of program. My understanding is, you know, these ARPA funds need to be spoken for by 24, and they have until 26 to be spent. And so it will definitely be a longer process when we get into that. I'm excited for launching that and really chomping at the bit. But until we get there, yes, there's definitely a need for that. So hopefully, Councilmember Maloney, that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hastings. I do appreciate the additional information on that. And so as you're speaking through that, all I can think of is like, that's an MBA 101 sort of thing, like the quick version of getting an MBA for some of these businesses. And I understand that that's definitely important and impactful for a lot of businesses. I would be interested at this point in time to see if we can prioritize it with some of the other items. But as you're well aware of, we're trying to move quickly. So I don't think that's not a long look. That's but maybe just slightly longer than I think as early as next week for maybe, in terms of what I would support for moving forward on business grants, because that application is wrapping up tomorrow. We want to make sure we can support those businesses directly as soon as possible. So I guess that's my 2 cents. And thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. I think there was one thing else that you brought up, Rita, and that is for the council to have a discussion on what to do if it exceeds what is available, and how do we, I'm going to use the word prorate it, maybe,
Yes.
if you will, prorate it so that everybody gets their share. That's going to be a little tough. I don't know how difficult it would be, and if anybody has any insight or want to speak up, go ahead and feel free to do that. It'd be nice to. Well, I guess prorating it sounds good to me, but I don't know how, and if that's possible. Do you have a way to prorate to see that everybody gets the percentage that they have allocated for them?
Yeah, there's few ways to go about it. One of the ways that you could do is essentially we had started the program with $30,000 being the maximum grant amount. We could go ahead and reduce that so that there's more money to be spread across more number of businesses, and so that helps more people, but maybe not at the same level as maybe some of the businesses were expecting. So that's one option. The other option could be that you look at the total amount that you have, you look at the total request, and basically prorate the percentages of the request and go about that way, which would be almost a peanut butter spread, but would be fair, and it would reach to a lot more people, so and a lot more businesses. Now the next option would be a little bit harder, but I think it is worth discussing, which is that there might be a consideration for the future viability of businesses. So there might be some businesses that do have a going concern, as in that they might not be in business or will not be in business in recent future. And if that is an analysis that you would like for us in the chamber to do and basically make that one of the requirements, that definitely would take a little bit more work, but worth the discussion.
That one would seem a little difficult for me,
Yeah.
because if you lost your business and you're in
Yeah.
debt, then maybe that funding will help you get out of some of that debt. So that would be a little harsh, I think. I kind of am in favor of, trying to figure out once the application period closes, to figure it out, and I'd be in favor of reducing the maximum to the amount to where we can assist everybody that needs help, because everybody has. How do you determine priorities or who deserves it more than the others? I just think that's too difficult. So any other suggestions or comments from the council?
This is Councilmember Alvarado.
Yes, Councilmember Alvarado, go ahead.
Just a quick question. I don't know if this is a conversation that's been had as far as the application, or perhaps someone could speak a little bit about just efforts for equity. There's folks who may have less access or less ability to understand. If any way to make up for that, or to provide more equity, Spanish speaking, or folks who may not necessarily have the same level of access as someone who has a very successful business.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to ask Mr. Hastings to speak to that. They've done a great job of ensuring that there's equal access to the information, assistance, and the application itself during this process.
Let's see if I can answer this. This is Colin Hastings with the Pasco Chamber again. So in terms of accessibility, I guess I can give you some round stats that may help paint the picture. Of the approximately almost 165, 170 of the applicants, I think around 50 or 51 filled out the Spanish only application. So I think that is a pretty good representation of, in terms of providing equity for those that where English is not their first language. In addition to looking at the overall spread of applications, I think that there is a larger contingent that would probably be mostly representative in the central core, Pasco, and businesses and retail from that standpoint. I think those have been the especially from what we saw from CARES of a lot of the businesses at the earliest inception of that weren't able to get a lot of the access. And so we are also looking and asking for information on what sort of previous relief that these businesses have received, whether it's PPP, CARES Act money, so forth. And you know, that could be weighted to a certain degree, but not much. A little difficult to do that because it kind of goes back to what's one business worth to another, and that's just really not an area where it's just tough to write just kind of a scoring sheet based on that. So I feel pretty confident that we've especially with the work that Michael has done, Mike Gonzalez has done as well too, with outreach plus what we've done. I think we've offered quite a bit of that to make sure that we have a pretty good coverage from that. Obviously, there's always going to be some outliers that we're not going to be able to get. I wish that we could. And, you know, from the standpoint too, where it's really difficult to estimate is until we get to that closing time. I mean, there may be a larger estimate of companies that aren't providing the documentation that eliminate their application. And I know that right now we're still working on getting those, and emails are still going and phone calls are going out tonight. And so that will give us a little bit of an idea of if there isn't enough funds for the valid requests that are out there. You know, I guess we can always figure out the percentage and go based on that as well. So Councilmember Alvarado, hopefully that answers your question. If I didn't, maybe rephrase it and I can take another stab at it.
I think that's a good. I think it's just a good conversation for us to have as far as what's the level of impact on the smallest of businesses that are probably hurting the most, and also folks who may have challenges in accessing it. So it sounds like those are being addressed. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Serrano. I just want a couple of comments here. One, kind of circling back to what Councilman Maloney mentioned, making sure that we balance this request of $2.5 million versus like what was it, 16.8 or 16.7 that we got, just to make sure that we're putting a fair shake into everything that we need. Unquestionably, small businesses are the backbone of our community, but we just need to make sure that it's actually on par with what needs to be funded compared to what other needs are. The second thing, I think, Mayor, and I don't know if this was something that you were throwing out or if I kind of missed the whole train of thought. You mentioned, you know, if someone lost their business and trying to help pay some type of debt forgiveness. I would be leery on stuff like that. And maybe Mr. Ferguson, I can't quite see who's there, if that's Eric or Craig or someone else in his stead, could correct me, but I'd be very concerned that we might run afoul of a gift of public fundings to forgive debt, even though it's COVID impacted. So ultimately, I just want to make sure whatever we're doing is above water. And again, you may have just been kind of throwing that out in passing, not suggesting that's exactly what we do. And I don't intend to call you out there, but just whatever we do needs to be above water.
Oh, I totally understand. And my point is, if it's not something that it's not appropriate, I'm by no means suggesting we go that way. I just don't want to leave out those who were stepped on the hardest, so to speak, for the program. If it's,
go Go ahead.
Yeah, I get it, and I totally respect, I also want to be above water. Do you have any comments?
I don't have a response on that right now. I know Craig is present remotely. Mr. Briggs, the other Mr. Briggs, he may have a response on that. If not, I will.
Yeah, I'm here, and I would just mention briefly so that under our ARPA 603 subsection C3, so we do have, transfer authority to make this specific, kind of pass through our chamber. The decision on, who's receiving the grants and who isn't is a difficult one. And certainly I'm not the expert in that regard. So, the city will have to make some difficult decisions with regard to that, but, we certainly do have the authority to provide that educational piece that was described earlier by our chamber president. And really that's a goal there to make sure that, and as he had described, Colin had described earlier, to ensure there's some longevity to that business, to make sure that when we do come out of COVID, that business, has that longevity, that they're able to, outlast the grant.
I appreciate that. I think the specific question from my end is whether or not ARPA funds can be used to forgive debt incurred, as a failed business or closed business due to COVID. If you don't have that answer now, that's totally fine. I see Colin's raising his hand.
So maybe I can provide a little bit. If Councilmember Serrano, it's hard to really determine if a business is going out of business, unless they tell us that. And none of the businesses have said, hey, we're out of business, but I'd like to be made whole as best as I could. What we're seeing in some of the businesses is their revenue has not had an uptick. Once we were shut down, it was pretty easy to see in April and May and so forth in 20 that there was no revenue coming in, but there wasn't much of a rebound, if any at all. They still may be paying rent on a place or something along those lines. And it's hard to make, based on those numbers, that they're going out of business. We kind of have a suspicion that may be what's going on, but we really don't have a way to really prove that. And as I understand the language in the application, it says if you are harmed by COVID, this grant is for you. So I think that's where maybe there's that area there that we moving forward on this, that based in the letter there, that that may be something we have to do. I wouldn't say, not knowing the numbers off the hand, it's not a huge number, but there's definitely a number there, and enough where we say, okay, well, we have a suspicion this business may not reopen, and that may take away from a business that really needs the help to continue and prosper going forward. But at the same time, as I said, with the language in there, if you're harmed by COVID, you can't, it kind of puts us in a little bit of a pickle, and that's why we're asking the question and some guidance from council.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so I guess with that statement, I don't object to that. In fact, I'd support assisting folks who are going to carry forward liabilities with no way to repay them. Kind of supporting the mayor's statement there. Again, I think just ensuring, if the Briggs brothers or Mr. Ferguson could just do some quick review of that to ensure that forgiving or debt or providing assistance to someone who's not going to reopen, that cannot reopen, doesn't run afoul ARPA. Last thing we need to do is be in the position to have to recall money that we granted or pay it to the federal government, because that benefits no one. So again, I'm supportive of the position and proposition as long as it's legal.
Yep, and I would agree with those sentiments, Mr. Serrano. So
and
thank you for that.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just point out briefly, we did back, because this issue has came up before, initially in a different context, but back in March 17 of 2020, our Attorney General did issue an opinion more related to CARES, but giving guidance on analyzing issues related to the gifting of public funds during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it does give us, some insight into that issue. I think this was more related to kind of the moratorium utilities, things of that nature. But what was stated there was that it would be difficult for the AGO's office to imagine a situation where if the local government is responding to an impact related to COVID, that would run afoul of our anti-gifting of public funds under our constitutional provision, which typically would prohibit those types of transfers. But for the pandemic and the necessity to respond to the COVID emergency. So I think it would probably be a similar analysis here, so long as we could tie it to a valid, obviously, eligible use under ARPA. But we'll certainly look into that more. And I'll double check the AGO's page to see whether or not there's been another memorandum that's been issued post ARPA legislation.
Perfect.
Mr. Mayor, I think I can put everyone at ease here. The scenario that we're discussing is essentially that they can, once we have qualified them with certain amount of documentation for a certain amount of funding, it does not disqualify. We don't have anything to do with what they do with that money. So that might put everybody at ease in terms of this discussion. So our duty is to ensure that we are providing them with funds for economic harm from COVID-19, which is past in nature. I do believe that it would be an eligible use for our ARPA funds. It's just a matter of, given the restriction in resources, what would be the best path forward? And that is where the question came up.
Okay. So with that, Director Richa, I don't know if you've got a good feeling for the council and what we're looking for, or do you want a specific, this is what we want?
We would appreciate maybe a number that you would like for us to move forward with. It does not have to be the full request, or it could be that you could choose to, the $1 million that you had acted upon on July 6th included a couple of different programs. So if council's wish today is that we put the education program in the back burner and utilize the funds that we had allocated for that specific program. We were a little bit high level when we came to you on July 6th, just given the timing of it and how quickly we had to move, but also that we just did not know if there were going to be other partners who were going to come to the table with similar programs. So we're here now, we know exactly, or at least an estimate of what the demand is going to be, and wondering if you would like for us to take that $1 million and utilize it all in business grants. That's one option. You could increase it partially or the full 2.5, maybe an idea of what you would like to do and what we should come back with next week.
Okay.
So this is Councilor Maloney. My preference would be that we fully fund the qualified amount that will be necessary to fully fund all of the, again, qualified requests, understanding that some of them may not be able to provide the evidence required, and that we put additional business education on hold for now. Again, I don't mean forever, but I mean like maybe just for right now, let's rack and stack it with everything else. But I would ask that we fully fund the requests. That's my preference.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney, and I would second that. I think we need to get, the people need help right now, and we can do the education funding later if available funds. Anybody else have a preference?
Yeah, Mayor, this is Councilman Milne.
Yes, Councilmember Milne.
So I agree with Mr. Maloney as far as, and your second as well. I would hope that, again, I know businesses being in business longer, how many years they've been in business, usually have a better chance of surviving than to somebody that just started up. I don't know if that is a qualification as far as if they get moved higher up the line, if they've been in business, say, for 20, 30 years versus a guy that's been in business for 2 years. I would hope that would be the case, but again, I know you guys know your things more, but that's what I would hope, that, again, try to keep the businesses that have been here the longest, keep the doors open. And then I did have a kind of question. So when this gets finalized tomorrow, how long are we waiting for? I mean, how soon would the people get their checks? Is that months away, or is that weeks away, or what are we talking here on that?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Hastings.
Good question, Councilmember Milne. Our goal is to get the money out as quickly as possible. In terms of the committee meeting, we were hoping to meet this Thursday, but we've had some sickness in families of committee members, and quite frankly, we want to make sure we provide all the information and transparency to the committee so they can see all the applications, not just the ones that we feel meet muster. So if there's a business from Kennewick that is applying, we want them to see that, and so that they have full knowledge as to all that they're reviewing, so that they can make the right decision. That's putting us a little bit further back in terms of gathering all that information, as you know, for putting together for the staff, putting together a council packet. It takes a little bit of time. It's hard to kind of turn it around with all the information. So our goal is still the next week, by the end of next week, that I start cutting checks. We're doing it old fashioned because we want to make sure that we'll be sending out physical checks, and they're going to be sent certified mail, which is a lot more process to go through, but we wanted to make sure, in terms of that we're being good stewards of the money, that there's not maybe an account somewhere that wasn't destined for a business in Pasco, but maybe somewhere across the world. So I think having a certified mail and that old-fashioned process of having the written receipt and everything else is going to add more time to the process, but at the same time, it really makes sure that these funds are used exactly the way they're supposed to do. So my goal is to have that by the end of next week, that checks start going out. Hopefully all of them, but there may be a few, hang-ups here and there, just as we certify addresses. We found that out with the CARES Act, that the addresses that were given to us weren't valid addresses, and so there was checks that were floating around the U.S. Postal Service for literally, in some cases, months. Learning from experience, that's kind of the process, and that's what we're hoping to do, because it's loud and clear that we need to get this money out as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Hastings.
Thank you. And my last, I was also wanting to comment that I would hope that more businesses would get the money versus, I know the 30,000 ceiling. I'd rather, if we had to lower it and give more of the businesses, a share of the money, I'm for that. I'd like to see more of people be able to, this money to help them versus just a few. That's just my 2 cents on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Milne. Anyone else? So hopefully that was helpful, Director Regia.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we've covered most everything on this topic, and I think we can move on. And any objections or? All right. Well, thank you for that, Councilman. Thank you, Director Regia, for that. We can get that moving right along. And thank you, Mr. Hastings and Mr. Gonzalez, for participating in this topic. Next, we'll move on to the next item. Next, we'll move on to the next item, and that's a life and safety program for commercial structures. Director White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. And much like the previous item, hopefully this will initiate a discussion with Council on the policy directions for a program that's intended to assist with code and structural improvements for commercial structures. Staff hopes to gain direction from Council on the program itself, taking into account that differing funding sources for possible sources of funds will necessitate different approaches. We hope to hear discussion on the direction of the program focus itself, eligibility, both who, and applicability, where the program should take place in, the recommended improvements to commercial structures, any matching requirements or required level of owner participation in improvements to their buildings, and many of the other areas that are outlined in the agenda report, which contains a number of questions and issues that are intended to start this discussion. So with that, Mr. Mayor, again, much as in the previous item, staff would certainly appreciate hearing council's direction on this program, proposed program, and we'll have to bring those guidelines back to council once we hear on those directions.
Thank you, Director White. I think this is a tough one for me. I think I'll see if the council has any suggestions, comments?
Ms. Councilmember Maloney, I can start off.
Okay. Go ahead, Councilmember Maloney.
Great. So I think this is what I think of as in terms of assisting some of the downtown businesses with their basic infrastructure that's preventing them from opening at capacity and being able to provide the level of service that they would like to do and that ultimately we're going to need for our downtown to be vibrant. So this one, I know it's tricky because there's a lot of moving parts with this, and there's a lot of conversation about in what environment does it need to be? What's the best use of the money? Is this a valid use of how we should spend our available funding and such? But basically, what it comes down to me is when I look over at, say, for example, Prosser, right? When they lost a big portion, they lost a portion of their downtown, including their city hall, because of fire in their common wall buildings in their downtown corridor. And so when we're looking at some of the building upgrades that may be needed, the basic infrastructure, life systems for it, electrical, fire protection, things like that. I think that there's a strong case for us needing it in our downtown corridor, primarily focused on our common wall buildings, though there might be some exceptions to standalone buildings. But for me, I see this as being a necessary element to help with those businesses that have been hurt most by the COVID restrictions. Again, in our downtown corridor, which is very largely driven by the tourism in the local area of fiery foods and Cinco de Mayo and all that. So looking at the nexus of those service businesses in downtown that were harmed by COVID. So I guess that's my thoughts on where I would like to see this go and what I think the benefit can be and how this really has a strong nexus with the ARPA, the intended use of the ARPA funding. So I hope that makes clear what I envision and what I think we've discussed in the past as a council and heard strong requests from a number of downtown business owners and advocates for where we should try to invest the money if at all possible.
Thank you.
Mr. White, did I cover all the sort of questions that you have? I know there's a number of questions about administering programs, be it loans or other things. I don't have strong preferences on those. And so I guess I'm looking for legality and reasonableness on those sort of things. And I trust staff could think those through better than I could.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Alvarado?
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Alvarado.
I guess to piggyback on that, I appreciated Councilmember Maloney's ability to put those thoughts together. I think that definitely a lot more articulate than mine. I think if I were to feel like I could make a good decision on something like this, I think it'd be good to have a couple of options of what those programs could look like and what the impact to the city would be. I think there's definitely, I guess, a spectrum of loan versus grant and combinations thereof. And so I think it'd be good to see, what would it look like for us to be able to help people who may not have the ability to have a conventional loans because of their credit or things like that, but perhaps this creates an opportunity for them. And while there's still some skin in the game. And so I also don't have the answer to that, but it'd be helpful to have some form of options of what those could look like and some potential rough impacts. I don't know if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. I guess I'm still a little confused on where the funding would come from. I mean, in some of these bullets, it talks about, that, for example, ARPA may not even, be available. I mean, where would they come from? Do we have different options of where they would come from?
Yes, we do, Mr. Mayor. ARPA is one of them. Of course, they have to be related to the pandemic in some manner. We also have the ability to use block grant funds, not necessarily this year or in 2022, but certainly council can explore policy direction to begin to use block grant funds for that, recognizing that a certain percentage of our excess block grant funds that we allocate to different priorities each year do impact the general fund. So in a way, we have the general fund and block grant in addition to ARPA to utilize as a source of funding for this kind of a program.
Okay. I guess I just find it difficult without knowing the source of where we can get it from first. And then that would be helpful on us to determine, whether through loans or through grants, whether or not, who gets them. But I guess that's the part that I'm struggling with. It just seems like we're jumping ahead, without knowing where the source and the funding will come from. But once we find that out, and if it would be just helpful just to get the ideas out, then I would be in line with what the other council members have expressed. But yes, I would say we'd probably get maybe the oldest buildings, the building with the most need, and also maybe you just ensure that the applicants, we have to find a way to ensure that they're using them for those certain things, for those certain projects that we're talking about, and that would be in the buildings and remodeling and upgrade systems of that nature. So. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that. It's just really hard as I was reading through this to figure out, exactly some of those things without knowing where the source was going to come from. But any other comments? I'm not being very helpful here, I admit. But any other comments from council?
This is Councilmember Roach.
Yes, Councilmember Roach.
Yeah, just wanted to say that I definitely feel like I've heard numerous times, especially in the past year and a half, that putting in those, making the buildings downtown up to code with, whatever the fire code requires is something that is worthwhile as an investment. I don't know. Yeah, it seems unclear as to how we would do it. But I think too, we heard during pandemic that increasing the outdoor capacity, increasing the outdoor capacity for some of these buildings to spill out onto the sidewalks was something that business owners told us repeatedly. And I think that, taking a look at that, I didn't see it as one of the bullet points in the report. Is something that I was personally interested in after hearing from downtown business owners. And the other is that, one of the ideas besides talking about CDBG or ARPA funds, the report, it says that we could issue loans, and I guess I'm not familiar with the city doing that. So my question to Director White would be, if we do issue a loan to a business, does the city collect interest on loans?
Well, we don't have a lot of examples to pick from, but we do use home funds, interest-free, for first-time home buyers for a period of 5 years. And after 5 years is reached and the owner, the first-time home buyer, is still in the home and meeting other requirements, that loan is forgiven. Something like that could be a model, perhaps. It's and that's a good question. I don't think that there's anything prevent interest from accruing on a loan, but I don't know also if it's the right direction the council wants to go with something of this nature.
Thanks for answering that question. Yeah, that's something I would be more interested in looking at, even if it was something that was really low interest for business owners. I also like the idea of matching either for the business owner or the tenant. So those are my 2 cents on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. Anyone else?
Yep, this is Serrano. I got a couple of thoughts here. I like what Councilwoman Roach said there about expanding capacity, and I think that we need to consider that as we look at these funds. I think the first question is, if we're offering a specific fire and safety type improvement, one, will that in fact allow these businesses to increase capacity sufficiently? Do they need other improvements that we're not suggesting? If so, we ought to consider those, unless they're prohibitively expensive. The second question I have is, and I probably should have just done this research on my own, but I don't know. I know a lot of cities have like specific downtown historical landmark or zoning codes and ordinances that only allow for certain improvements. And if in fact some of these buildings or all of them would fall within those parameters, this issue could potentially be dead in the water. Again, I apologize. I didn't have the chance to look at the city code, but you know, if that's the case, we need to just, I don't want to get anyone's hopes up to find out that we can't even do this. There was a third point or comment that slipped my mind, but if Director White has anything to say, I'd certainly welcome that, and I'll think through maybe what the third point was.
Thank you, Councilman Serrano. There is not a historical component to the program unless the owner wants there to be. The way our historic preservation code is written, it requires the owner to take that on themselves. So unless it's initiated by the owner themselves, the answer would be no. There's no historic component to this.
Okay, excellent. And then again, you know, one thing, and I'm not asking for a laundry list now, but if there are things like certain walls or whatever, other improvements that we want to include, assuming they're not prohibitively expensive, let's consider that within this program if we do move forward. Man, I had that third thing the second time, but now I've forgotten it. So apparently it's been already a long night. I appreciate what you've got. Thanks.
City Manager Dave Zabel.
So I wanted to get just a little bit of clarity, and I'm kind of sensing what I'm hearing from council is this program would be limited to downtown, or is it citywide? I mean, I've kind of heard a little bit of both. Well, I've heard 2 or 3 council members talk about specific to downtown.
Yeah.
I've heard Common Wall mentioned.
Well, I think it would only be fair if they're older historical buildings with these type of issues, that they would all qualify regardless. But I mean, I think it's obvious that most of those old facilities are downtown. That's why I would assume that they were referring to those. But I would open it up to anybody who has buildings over a certain year, for example. Any comments from council on that?
Councilmember Alvarado?
Yes, Councilmember Alvarado.
Yes, I'm thinking perhaps from a perspective of fairness, perhaps having a criteria that determines, you know, what some of the goals that we're trying to meet with this are, and perhaps that there might be some geographic aspect of it, but maybe it would make it more fair to have some component of criteria that have perhaps you know, historical or viability of a business district or something along those lines that would help. I don't know if that would help us with the legality of it or the ability to make it fair, but I just think perhaps the criteria might be a better way.
How about the question of whether or not there had to be a business operating within the building prior to COVID? Just trying to look for some criteria to put a program together.
I mean, I think that, you know, what we found with some of our downtown business owners is that they find themselves renting a space that they don't know that they're going to get hit with code enforcement. And then they do. And so then it can be a struggle between them and the building owner to pay for those upgrades. So, I mean, my initial response would be yes, because it makes it more friendly for businesses to exist.
And this is Serrano. I'll counter with no. I don't think we ought to be funding improvements that are made via COVID funds and that sort of thing, and after the fact acquisitions or lease agreements.
So this is Councilmember Maloney, and I guess I have a third nuanced take to that is, to heck, regardless of businesses, our downtown usage and our vitality of our downtown corridor is being hindered by the businesses not being able to be open at a reasonable capacity. We're having churn of businesses again and again. We're at the same location. We have massive compliance issues. And at the end of it, it's a lot of this life safety. We're talking about people who are, businesses who this could actually, we could have our downtown be in real trouble if we don't have adequate fire suppression, especially in common wall buildings. So when we're talking about some of these, I'm really thinking about not just, economic vitality and safety as primary keys, and then the understanding that a lot of these businesses in our downtown corridor were heavily affected by the stop of events and the tourism and movement, even more so than a lot of restaurants across the rest of the city and across the rest of the nation and world. So what my personal focus is common wall buildings that once upon a time were grandfathered in, and that grandfathering was removed. But it's about the build. To me, it's about the buildings, not about specifically about the businesses or who's in there, today. So I guess it's just my take, which, sorry for complicating things further, but I'm just, I guess, trying to flesh this out as how am I thinking about this.
Hey, this is Councilman Milne, and I had a question, and I just want to make sure I heard right. Is it the landlord the owner, the business owner, is he on the hook for, like, say, a loan or a grant? I mean, if you gave it to a business and then they did something else with the funds, I mean, I know the business is going to want the building upgraded, but the landlord is the one that's getting the use of it in the long term. So if the business, say, gets the loan and then they move, of course, they're not going to want to pay anymore. They'll just shut down and rename their company. And then, of course, or if it's the landlord, of course, he's going to want to raise rent because now his building is going to attract more people. Who is on the hook for all this? I mean, that's kind of what I was kind of confused about as far as, is it the business or the landlord, and how do you differentiate? Because the business is going to want it, but the landlord might not want to pay an additional loan. So do you have an answer for that question?
If I could just step in briefly, this is Attorney Craig Briggs.
Yes, go ahead.
So, and if we look at ARPA, it speaks with regard to the business itself. So I think when we're looking at this, it has to be from the perspective of the business, as opposed to the owner of that property. Because they are, in fact, the ones who, are going to have to show that there was, an economic impact tied to COVID-19. That was either created by COVID-19, or maybe it was a problem that was already in existence prior to that onset, but was exacerbated by COVID-19. But in any event, the subject of that discussion is the business.
Okay, thank you.
So I think block grant and Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, is probably going to be the property owner, because you have to have some security.
Okay.
So it just depends on the program.
I would agree with that. Thanks for pointing that out.
So one of the things that have come up, we've talked a little bit about loans, which, I think we've just kind of cleared that up. That's more of a block grant thing than an ARPA thing. And there's a practicality to ARPA as well, that it has to be paid back by 2026. That's a pretty short turnaround, depending on what the improvement might be. I think another piece, though, that I've heard kind of kicked around a little bit tonight is whether council feels a business owner or a property owner, it would be appropriate to have them have a little bit of skin in the game, I guess, in terms of a match. Yeah. And is that's something council wants us to look at when we're kind of formulating a proposal for a program?
Well, the way I would respond to that is that part of the application is if to provide some type of financial statement, and I don't know if that's the case or not, but the match part kind of concerns me because we've had a program downtown for the facade program, and it's been a struggle. I mean, if they're struggling, they're struggling more, not just halfway. For the most part, it really slows down. So I would try to tend away. But again, I bring up the financial part of it is because if they could, I mean, they should. This assistance is not to provide them with free, with things for free. It's to help them get to the point where they can start being productive and not productive, but just trying to be successful in their business and getting through the issues with the building and the codes and the fire safety. So I know that's not answering your question, Mr. Zabel, but I don't know. What do you, council, what do you think about the match option?
I think, I mean, I don't want to give a weasel answer of case by case basis, but I agree with that there should be some type of, at least some type of carrot, whether it's match funds or some sort of, I'll stay in this place for X amount of years. Yeah, I do think there needs to be some type of match funds or maybe even paying it back with interest. I don't know what exactly it looks like, but I do agree with the concept that there should be some skin in the game. And then separate note, I do recognize we're working on a downtown master plan, but I'm going to ask staff, I've asked this several times, is there anything that we could do with our code immediately, even on a temporary basis, in expanding the uses in downtown that could be beneficial? I don't need an answer now, but if we're going to talk about this next week, maybe as a sub item, not for decision, I think that would be very beneficial use of our time because we might be able to attract businesses that are not presently allowable to help, buffer this, help weather the storm of what's happening via the COVID pandemic, and specifically, and as Councilman Maloney's mentioned, downtown that's really been hit hard that we want to preserve. We're putting money into Peanuts Park, Blue Street Overpass, and that corridor. If we have beautiful amenities, I know Mr. Gonzalez is working on trash receptacles and several other things. But look, if we're putting money into this and beautifying it, we need to have patrons and shops. And, if something like the second hand being disallowed, if we could at least temporarily allow for those uses, we need to amend the code. We need to do something to allow the businesses to function. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does council have any thoughts on whether a business should have been in business for any length of time prior to receiving any kind of assistance? In other words, if I'm a brand new business, is it worthwhile to extend a grant or a loan to me as opposed to someone who's been downtown for a certain number of years or some other period of time?
Good question.
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Mr. White, I guess my one, I guess what we're talking about specifically with ARPA, I think this was mentioned by our legal team earlier, nexus with COVID impacts is kind of key here. The existing business owners have been impacted by COVID and are continuing to be, and helping them be able to open larger and with more, to a larger set of patrons would improve their viability long-term as well as help them recover from COVID. And so because I know I'm still fixated on ARPA funds, and part of that's because when we're talking about block grant, we're talking 2 years down the road before we could even get started. We're talking about general fund. We know we're already really tight on a lot of areas there. We've allocated and planned allocations for those general fund dollars. And so when I'm thinking ARPA, this is free money is not what this is. There's always strings attached. But from a standpoint of we have this money that was unplanned, and so I guess what I'd be interested in for a program like this would be that nexus with COVID impacts might be the right nexus to help us understand, businesses that are that have been impacted by COVID, have been open for some period of time, and are already interested in getting, potentially getting some relief, or have that nexus with being impacted by the pandemic. So maybe that ends up solving a lot of the issues and keeps us more bulletproof in the long term.
Anybody else?
Mayor?
Yes.
I guess I would just, in limiting or talking about the activities, confirm what I'm hearing is electrical, fire protection, outdoor seating came up. And then one other item didn't come up, but I think it's kind of along those lines, and that's sanitation. And that's something that we're kind of wrestling with downtown right now anyway. Mm-hmm. And making it better is going to bring people in and help aid the recovery. So I wanted to add that as a potential program area. If there's no objection from council.
Nope, no objection from me. I think it's just as important. Anybody else? I think we can agree on that.
Councilor Maloney, no objection here.
Yep. So hopefully, I know this was a tough topic, and I don't know if we can provide any more help at this hour. I mean, this is almost something that we could spend hours trying to get to, but hopefully we've given some comments that would help move this forward a little bit.
Yeah, this has been very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Whew. Thank you for that, Director White. And I will move on to the next option, as long as everybody's in agreement. We'll go to item C, and that is the I-82 Broadmoor Interchange Improvements. DKS Associates, Inc., Professional Services Agreement Design. Director Steve Worley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This item tonight is to talk about a improvement to the I-182 Broadmoor Interchange project. The concept of that is shown on the screen right now. That is not a final, but that is just one concept. As most everybody knows on the council and in the public, there is a lot of development proposed for the Broadmoor area. And with that proposed development comes an increase in traffic. And one of the things that has been identified through a lot of the studies and analyses that have been completed so far as part of our Transportation Systems Master Plan and other studies in the area, there are improvements that will be needed to the exit ramps off of I-182 at the Broadmoor interchange. And so we are looking into this as a new project. One of the things that you will note about this one compared to some of our other projects is this is a WashDOT facility. And so with that requires a lot of additional effort on our part in order to make any proposed changes to an existing interchange. We will require WashDOT and the Federal Highways Administration approval, and they have a very prescriptive process that we have to go through in order to get those approvals and to actually get a final design and the construction of the project completed. The key to this improvement is to complete what is called an access revision report. And it happens on all of the interstates throughout the state with WashDOT. And the effort that you see in the scope of work before you tonight is a planning phase mostly, where we look at all the different elements of this project to help us get to a decision on the access revision, the access revision report. And so there, you will see in the scope, there is a lot of tasks associated with this scope of work. One item that I will mention is that many, or let me rephrase that. There are tasks in here that are included that we hope will not be needed. And the reason I say that is because of that prescriptive process that I mentioned before that WashDOT and FHWA require us to go through. But in this particular project, because we are looking at just the exit ramps, there may be opportunities for us to minimize some of the efforts needed to get to the approvals that we need. But we included them all in the scope in case we have to go through them. After we get through some of the planning phase of this, then we will be back with an increase in the scope for design purposes. And that will actually do the design for whatever the improvements are decided and approved on by FHWA. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions related to this scope of work.
Mayor, I would just add one point for the record, and that's, as council is well aware and the community is well aware, we get backups on the main line right now. And we put a lot of study into this interchange. That interchange improvement is needed today. It's more so needed in the future. That's certainly going to exacerbate an already difficult situation, but what Director Worley has laid out for you tonight in terms of a schematic of a future improvement would be vast improvement from an operational and safety standpoint for that entire interchange. And as I said, needed today, and as we see development happen to the north and south, it'll be needed even more so in the future.
Thank you, City Manager Dave Zabel, and thank you, Mr. Worley. That basically those what you're showing us there is kind of like what's happening over at Kingsgate, right? Where there's the exit that goes off, like towards the Walmart, and then the one where it goes the other way. So, yeah, and I see that's helpful, and you're right. That exit there gets backed up. It causes many accidents on the bridge, and it's definitely an issue. So I'm in favor of it. Anybody else in the council have any comments?
Yeah, this is Serrano. Just two clarifying questions. One, this is a scope of work solely for design, correct?
This is the scope of work for mostly the planning phase and some of the preliminary design, some of the start of the design. There will be additional work and scope needed for the final design of the final proposed solution.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. And then this scope of work is to be completed by the end of calendar year 2024, correct?
This particular scope of work should be completed much sooner than that. Our goal is to push the process as quickly as we can, which may even include parallel processes. WashDOT is aware of the need to get this addressed as soon as possible because of the existing conditions that City Manager Zabel mentioned and the proposed developments that are proposed in the Broadmoor area. So while it typically takes quite a while just to get the access revision report completed, we're going to try to push the process as much as we possibly can.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
And I would like to add one more thing, and that is you will notice in the scope of work that there is an active transportation alternatives element to the access revisions report. And so this will address the pedestrian issues that has been on Pasco's TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, for quite a few years. So this project will act as sort of a precursor to make improvements that will eventually end up benefiting the active transportation portion of this interchange.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you for that, Mr. Worley. I'll open it up for one more opportunity for comments. If not, then this is going to come for approval for next week's meeting, correct?
That is correct.
All right. So if I'm not hearing any other comments or suggestions from council. Looking forward to it next week.
Sounds great.
Thank you. All right, next we'll move on to the proposed sewer local improvement districts in new urban growth areas. Mr. Worley.
Good evening again. And speaking of developments in and around Pasco, as council knows, there was an expanded UGA that was approved as part of the comprehensive plan that was recently approved. And although that process is being appealed right now, staff is looking at the potential to serve the expanded UGA area with sewer services. And one of the items that came up through the suggestion of the very astute city manager we have here in Pasco, that an idea would be to sewer this area through the formation of LIDs, with the idea being that it would allow a much more robust development of this area and much more uniform development of this area if the backbone sewer system were constructed that allowed all of the properties in this UGA area to be able to tie into and connect to, and that it would all work, rather than allowing the system to be constructed in kind of a piecemeal pattern as developments occur. So we thought that was a great idea, and we have a lot of support from the property owners in the UGA area. They've really encouraged it and worked with us, and so as part of that process, we have asked one of our local consulting engineering firms, RH2, to evaluate this sewer area and give us a proposal on how we might best serve this area with an LID. And here tonight is Ryan Withers from RH2 Engineering. And Ryan is going to go through a real quick presentation showing how they came up with the proposed LID.
Okay. Good evening.
Ryan?
Good evening. Thank you for the introduction.
Can I get you to just turn the speaker on, please? Thank you.
There we go. Thank you for the introduction. And so building upon what Director Worley indicated, the city's draft 2021 comprehensive sewer plan identifies planning level improvements to the expanded urban growth area. And then considering all of the items that Director Worley identified, we have been assisting the city staff in delineating possible local improvement districts or LIDs in this area to construct the sewer prior to that significant development occurring, similar to how the city has planned some of the utility improvements in the West Broadmoor area. So two possible LID areas have been delineated, with Road 68 acting as the boundary between them. We've termed them the West UGA Expansion LID and the East UGA Expansion LID, and I'll provide some additional detail to each of those areas on the next two slides. Here you see the West UGA Expansion LID. This is the area of the UGA expansion west of Road 68, and we've evaluated the ability to gravity flow through most of this basin with the lift station necessary on the western side of the area for some of the lowest elevations in the basin. That's the darker green area on the west side, closer to Dent Road extended. All of the flow in this area would be conveyed through the sewer main that's currently being installed in West Broadmoor this fall as part of the Northwest Sewer LID. On the other side of Road 68, the East UGA Expansion LID includes all of the area east of Road 68, as well as the port property along Railroad Avenue, shown in the orangish brown here. Even though it's not continuous with the area east of Road 68, it will share downstream infrastructure with the rest of the area east of Road 68. Another point of clarification here, the city's existing infrastructure south of Burns Road does not have adequate capacity to accommodate the long-term flow projections of this area. So either significant upsizing and replacement of existing sewer main or an alternate route further to the east are going to be necessary. The city's 2021 draft comprehensive sewer plan evaluated both of those options and recommended the alternate route as the preferred alternative. What that would mean is 2 lift stations would be necessary. One, a more smaller, localized lift station at approximately Road 60 extended, depending on proposed grading within future development. And then a larger, more regional lift station on Glade Road, shown in the sort of bottom right southeast corner of this image. All flow under this LID would ultimately be conveyed into the city's Maitland Avenue lift station. And then, so just in summary, hitting a couple of the points that Director Worley already indicated, these 2 local improvement districts would serve really the entirety of the UGA expansion area between the west and the east UGA expansion LIDs. And again, the benefits of pursuing LIDs are, you really have the ability to construct the sewer main prior to other utilities and improvements being installed. Some of the sewer main is larger diameter, some of it is very deep, or rather deep. And it's going to be much easier and cheaper for everybody to have those improvements installed when there's minimal utility congestion, traffic congestion, other improvements in the area. And then it also promotes near-term development of properties in the expanded urban growth area. There's properties that are distant from the existing collection system right now, and installation of miles and miles of improvements to connect to the downstream system may be prohibitive for those landowners. So this would really increase the value of the adjacent properties and also ensure coordination amongst the landowners, the developers, the city. It really provides that unified plan for sewer service throughout that entire area. So with that, just wanted to make council aware of the direction that the city staff has begun to review this area with the intention of returning at a future meeting to hopefully discuss formation or an update regarding these LIDs.
Thank you so much. And I'll open it up. Oh, Mr. Worley?
I was just going to wrap up by saying that we're here tonight to answer any questions of council, and if council agrees with the idea, then staff will likely be bringing forward a couple of LID formations for approval in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Worley. And so when we do LIDs, just real quickly, I mean, we've got the ability to fund this until the LIDs are purchased by the property owners. Where's the funding come from this?
Typically, what we would do is sell a bond to fund the project, and then the LID assessments would pay for those bond payments. Now, there are a couple of options that we could go to in terms of LID versus utility LID, and we usually, work with our bond financing and finance director and figure out what's the best approach that puts the city in the best position.
Perfect. All right. Any other questions or comments from council? For one, I think it's a great idea, and I appreciate staff coming up with that. I think this is great as long as we have the capacity to do it, and it looks like if there's no comments or questions from council, then we'll move forward with it. Thank you for your presentation tonight. City Manager DeZio?
Mayor, I did want to just mention that our next item, we're going to talk about utility extensions in the unincorporated parts of the county. And the prior issue, the one we're just closing up on, the LIDs, really kind of plays into a big chunk of that discussion, if you think about it, because that's the largest area. We have what's left of the 2008 urban growth area north of the city limits. We have the unincorporated islands, and we have this 2,800 some acres plus another 1,000 acres of industrial that are added with the 2020 UGA expansion. And this sewer that we're talking about basically covers that entire area and serves it. And as Director Worley mentioned, I think really sets the table for orderly and efficient development of the area. And I think over the years will lessen a lot of the issues that council's been having to deal with over the last several years as we've done some infill in the unincorporated islands, and as we developed out into the north and west, north of Burns Road. So I think I'm gonna let Rick get into the discussion on the next item, but I kind of wanted to link those two together so that council's thinking about this LID and how that one area, that big area, among the three areas Rick's gonna be talking about here in a minute, will be served by this LID project, so.
Yeah. Director White?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, and thanks, City Manager Zabel. That actually pretty much sums up my report. It actually puts the perspective on the discussion, which actually started back in July. That's returning from a late July introduction to Council. The agenda report contains, I think, a pretty good background discussion on urban growth areas and their importance and their purpose to provide cost-efficient and predictable municipal services to accommodate growth. Again, as the report states, Pasco has three very distinct portions of its urban growth area for development purposes. There's the area south of 182, the Riverview area, both existing and former Riverview County Island, that is probably the most problematic of all of the three in terms of development constraints. The street system, the provision for utilities, the fact that domestic water isn't available or desired by a number of property owners within that area, all point to a very unique and problematic environment for further subdivision. There's lands within the old 2008 urban growth area, not very many, but there are a few parcels where a good portion or maybe even all of its the development in those areas is furnished by on-site septic systems, generally on half-acre or larger lots. And then, of course, there's the 2021 expanded area, which you just saw the graphic of, that was approved through the most recent adoption of the comprehensive plan. What staff would like to propose is that a policy direction from council for each of the three areas would take place. For example, in the area, the Riverview area south of Interstate 182, city potable water would be extended for building permit applications on existing parcels. However, subdivision of those existing parcels would require the concurrent extension of city water, or excuse me, city sewer. There would also be a variance procedure if needed in the event that an engineering analysis proves that extension of city sewer simply isn't practical for some kind of subdivision proposal. For lands within the 2008 urban area north of Interstate 182, the same situation would exist for building permits on existing parcels. City potable water would be extended. However, any subdivision of those properties would require concurrent extension of city sewer. And it's anticipated that that extension of city water and sewer to further subdivide those properties would also carry with it the requirement that city standards be provided in terms of streets and other utilities. And then probably the easiest one, even though it's the largest amount of land, is the 2021 urban growth area boundaries that we just had the discussion relative to the sewer LIDs. This would simply require annexation for extension of city water and sewer. So again, this is broken down into bare essentials, so to speak. If council concurs with this or provides direction in another manner, staff will come back with a series of very likely code amendments in forms of ordinances and or resolutions to implement the proposed policy directions.
Okay, thank you for that, Director White. Council, do you have any questions or comments for Director White?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Martinez. And thank you, Mr. White, for the presentation. Could you give me a sense of how urgent it is that we make a decision on this? I'm not opposing anything you're saying, but I'm just trying to get, I guess, a sense of how immediately impactful some of these direction that you need from us is.
Well, it's not a crisis by any means, but it would be the mechanics of implementing this policy direction will take some time given the level of, as I mentioned, code amendments that might be required to do so. So it's not a crisis, but it probably is best served sooner rather than later.
Mr. White, I'm asking, obviously I don't want to slow anything down for the sake of slowing it down. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I know some of these matters are of great concern to our development community. And kind of the process we've generally tried to set up is, hey, we're having these hearings and having these things through the planning commission. And this is their opportunity to really have their voice heard and their concerns, vetted by staff and by the planning commission. Has this been through the planning commission at this point?
No, this has not. The thinking is that once the identified code amendments are put on paper, that will happen.
Okay, I guess I want to make sure that we're not shortchanging ourselves for some of this. Obviously, from my perspective, for the new UGA, I'm all in favor of the approach recommended by staff. For the old UGA, where we have some properties, especially to the northwest, that are problematic in terms of potentially getting sewer to, I want to make sure that we're not undercutting and painting yourselves in the corner with, for example, an exemption process not being applied to that, or an overly generous exemption process, meaning we don't move forward in the right way. So I guess I just want to make sure that we're when we're setting this policy here, I guess I'd like to say that I support where staff is going. I understand it, but I want to make sure that we're not making a big mistake with the direction we're going. So I'd be really interested in understanding how the general community is feeling about that. So I don't know if this is the right time to put it in front of the planning commission, or if maybe having the planning commission be I don't say hold a hearing as we start to get towards draft plans to make sure that we're going down the direction and not wasting staff's time and not wasting months down the road at the tail end of the process. So that's my thoughts there. So thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. And I think you hit on a very good topic. We need to make sure that the developers are online with this, and that's done at a planning commission level? Is that when they get the opportunity to give their public comment?
Certainly it can be.
That would be their first opportunity, and they'd certainly have opportunities at the planning commission. Then, when council's ultimately going to consider it for at a regular meeting, then they'd be able to do that through public comment as well there.
Okay.
But I think the planning commission gives them a workshop level, and then we're reaching out and working with the development community as well. I mean, as I think Director Worley had mentioned on the 2020 UGA area, that's essentially we're dealing with big property owners and developers up there, and folks are, I think, pretty well understanding what's going to happen and why it's going to happen, and they seem to be on board with it. The 2008 UGA area north of Burns, as Councilmember Maloney mentioned, there's a piece up north that looks undeveloped, though I maybe heard today that might be preliminary platted already in the county. Yeah, so that may not even be an issue at this point. And so that leaves just a remaining couple parcels down at the bottom, right where sanitary sewer is going to pop out onto Burns Road, with some of the development that's occurring. And so probably the biggest pill to swallow, or the biggest thing on our plate, is the Unincorporated Islands, particularly in that donut hole area, because we have a couple smaller unincorporated islands as well, but those two bigger ones in what used to be called the donut hole area, there's some infill opportunities up there, or out there, and I think that's, and we had proposed, or at least council to consider a variance procedure. I mean, there may be, development may be such that it doesn't make sense to try to run a sewer line up if everything has already been developed to a point that it can't be, let's say, reconfigured to more efficiently. So we're just gonna have to really look at those and really think about what that criteria is. That's, you know, a regular city council meeting is probably not the place to do that. So I think the planning commission gives us a good forum to do it, as well as our monthly developer meetings that we have as well.
Okay. All right. I just want to, yeah, I guess I just wanted to make sure that we get, you know, the full, you know, give everybody an opportunity to put in their 2 cents, and then we can get it as a council and get a report on how it all comes back.
That's the intent.
All right, thank you. Any more questions or comments from council? All right, thank you for that. And now we'll move right on to the next topic. I believe it's we're on F now. National Community Survey. City Manager Dave Zabel.
So good evening again, Mayor and Council. What you have in front of you is, I'll cut to the chase. We do our National Community Survey every couple of years. We're rolling up on that, and we had talked about this a little bit previously at a prior workshop. And what we have for you, based on that conversation, is some draft questions. There's probably still some wordsmithing that needs to occur. Maybe do some of that tonight, but the National Community Survey policy questions were allowed 3, and we have, based on our last discussion with council, we have about 4. So we need to kind of look at those real quick and provide us a little bit of guidance. So we had the topics, short-term rentals was a topic we had talked about, the use of Airbnb and VRBO, those kind of things happening in the community. It's been a big issue in some communities. I don't know that, Mr. White, I don't know if we've had much in terms of complaints here.
Yeah, we get maybe a dozen or half a dozen. Well, no, I can't even. We probably get between a dozen and 2 dozen complaints a year about unapproved or unlicensed Airbnbs.
And mental health sales tax is an issue. Obviously, we've had a lot of discussion over that in the last couple of years as we've seen folks in our community struggle. The mental health sales tax would represent a 0.1% tax that could go towards providing mental health services in our community. And there's a regional effort underway right now, as well as many on council are aware that Benton County's, at least at this point, taken the lead on. City of Pasco is certainly engaged in it, particularly fire chief and police chief. Both are monitoring and participating in that, with the fire chief taking a lead role. When we had the last discussion here a couple of weeks ago, the issue of marijuana came up, and maybe a check-in with the community as to their sentiments on retail sale of marijuana, and yeah, I guess that's both of those, isn't it? Okay. So I throw it out to council just to get a little bit of feedback on those topics, and we can work with the National Citizen Survey folks, our consultants on this, get those questions finalized, and we can run them past council one last time before they go out to the public, which will occur November, December timeframe.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, City Manager Dave Zabel. Questions or comments from the council? Well, I'm certainly in favor of, these are good questions. I think on the marijuana question, it was just a matter of whether we want to just, I mean, you're asking the same thing, correct?
Largely,
just
yes.
A different way of asking
Yeah,
it?
different way of asking, yeah.
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
I guess between the two options there, I suspect that the professionals that run these surveys probably have a good idea of how to ask that question just right, and so I'm comfortable with whatever will ultimately be recommended by them to frame this up correctly. So I would hate to speculate on how to best say that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and it looks to me like the second option's incomplete. So that's my simple take. I guess maybe it is a complete sentence. Just the first one seems to read clear.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Any other comments? Other than that, I think we're
Great, thank you,
we're in line
appreciate
with
that.
that.
So we'll finalize those questions with the consultant. They can take any unintended biases or whatever out of it and make that a neutral question for the public to consider.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right, next we'll go to resolutions on the Wihi Water Main and Wrigley Drive Extension Project acceptances. Director Steve Worley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members again. I'm going to turn this item over to our Capital Improvement Program Manager, Maria Serra.
Good evening, Ms. Sarah.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm here to present to you two project acceptances for capital projects completed in this year. We will be seeing some other acceptances later in the year, but we decided to not bring all of them together. So we can talk a little bit more about each of these. The first project we will talk about is the alley east of Wihi water main replacement. This was a much needed system improvement to our water line that was undersized in this alley. The project was designed in-house, and the bid was awarded to Industrial Construction of Washington from West Richland. The bid award was for $158,000 to $169.80. What we are seeing in the screen is the pictures of the before with some utility markings. And I'm gonna advance the screen here. Okay, this is during construction. As you can see, there were lots of utility crossings. It was a very tight right-of-way area to work, which resulted in some additional costs due to the inability to install the water line as designed and having found additional crossings that were unmarked. Okay, this is the project once it was completed, which included the repaving of the alley because it basically was all taken out by the trench. And a summary on the costs for the project. As I mentioned, the bid award was $158,000 to $169.80. The total project cost after, and I must say this is not total project cost, the total construction contract cost. This is what was paid to the contractor. Was $184,000 to $192.01, and the total for change orders was $21,000 to $163.80. And the other item that required a change order, as it's shown on the screen, was the connection to the existing 8-inch water main, which was anticipated to be a tap, so a hot tap when you don't have to do any shutdown of the line, and you can just come and put brace and cut and install your new line into it, but we found that that was not possible. So we had to do a shutdown and dig down, replace a portion of that pipe to install a fitting instead. Okay, so that's one of the two. And now moving on to the next project. This is Wrigley Drive Extension, and we've talked about this project quite a bit before because it had some positive impacts in the amount of traffic and some reduced congestion in Road 68. So Wrigley Drive extension was awarded to Culvert Construction for the amount of $285,000. This project was federally funded, and it provided a connection between Convention and the other road is escaping me, but it will come. Here we go. You can see this is the construction happening, where we just basically built the full road to provide this missing link in this road and allow for east-west traffic. And this is once everything is done with all the striping installed. Very good. Okay. Once again, let's talk about the project and the financials. As I mentioned, this project was federally funded. We awarded the bid to Culvert Construction in the amount of $285,000. The total construction contract cost came up to $302,289.79, and total change orders was $20,000, $137.97, if I wrote that right. Yes, right there, it's in the screen. The change orders address needed changes to irrigation and some grading that had to do with some water ponding on a portion of our, right next to our curb. So we needed to allow for proper drainage there. So there were some small modifications. And with that, we have two resolutions for accepting the award of these two contractors and then being able to release retainage. And that will be coming to you next week.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Sarah. Any questions or comments by staff? Or the council, I'm sorry. All right.
Yeah, this is Councilmember Maloney. Just a quick question. I'm full in favor of accepting these, the completion of these. No questions about that or those financials specifically. I know the Sandifer extension was supposed to, the Wrigley extension was supposed to help relieve some of the traffic on 68. Mr. Worley or Ms. Sarah, could you perhaps talk a little bit more about what's next? Is there something coming up next to continue to work on relieving the traffic congestion on Burden and 68?
Yes, this is Steve Worley. I can address that. And as you may recall, there were 3 projects that were identified with the federal funds we had available to help with the congestion at that intersection of Burden and Road 68. One of them was the widening of Road 68 south of the interstate. One was this extension of Wrigley Drive, and the other one was the signage and striping project that is currently going on right now at the Burden and Road 68 intersection. And so with that, that was supposed to improve the congestion, reduce it, decrease some of the delays that occurred there. There is likely more work to be done. I think in some of our capital improvement program planning and our TIP planning, we are looking at doing additional studies of that corridor and interchange to continue to look at ways to improve it. And so we're not done, but we have not identified what those future improvements will be, but we will.
Great, thank you. And sorry for putting you on the spot like that. It's just one of those items I know is very of great interest to our community and certainly to council. So I appreciate you keeping us up to speed on where that's at. And I know we have, I think, the transportation master plan is going for presentation next month, or there's some update that's going to be provided soon. Is that accurate?
That is true. It is coming to council soon for a presentation.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Director Worley.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. And if there's no other questions or comments, then we'll look forward to seeing this on next week's agenda. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Sarah. And thank you, Mr. Director Worley. All right, last but not least, do they save the best for last, Director Radke? We have a resolution for the Tri-Cities Youth Soccer Association agreement.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And to discuss this item and this resolution this evening, I'll introduce Brent Kubalik, our Recreation Services Manager.
Good evening, Mr. Kubalik. You're on. You were on. No, you were on already.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Glad to be here. So yeah, just a quick discussion on this. This extension of the agreement with TCYSA. We originally entered into an agreement which was then TCJSA for the development of the acreage around Giza Stadium for soccer complex back in 1995. And that was entered into. They developed the land into the soccer fields that we know today. That agreement was amended in 2005 to update their name to now TCYSA, what they're known as today, and also to incorporate a 10-year extension option into the agreement. That was done in 2005. Again, that original agreement was a 25-year, which we're past 25 years of that 1995, so they had decided to exercise the extension of the agreement. As we came to the table with them about that extension, things have changed over the last 25 years and over the last 15 years since that amendment, and so we sat down and talked about different things and incorporated some additional amendments into this renewal or this extension. In general, a lot of things remain the same. The premises shall generally be used for soccer play, including league play and clinics and tournament play out there. TCYSA is to communicate their use schedule with us, and that's the same as it was before, just to kind of define a little bit more when that schedule should be sent over to us so we can coordinate on that. TCYSA in the agreement before said that they needed to organize local and regional tournaments. That remains. We just added in there. They've been doing a 4th of July soccer tournament in conjunction with us, and we had that tournament would count as one of the tournaments that they need to organize as part of the agreement. TCYSA is to submit to us their rental rates with supporting rationale. I know we get at the recreation office, we get often asked about renting those fields, and we have to send people over to them to inquire about that. We got a lot of questions, so for us to be able to communicate more effectively with them and understand the rationale between what their rental rates, and we get asked, well, why is theirs more than renting from us at Road 36 or whatnot. We're able to, with this, be able to answer more clearly on that. TCYSA, it lines out the payment schedule, which is the $44,000 right now, going up 3% annually thereafter. That kind of continues what had been incorporated in the last agreement. And then the termination of the lease is the same as it was. We also incorporated with if you recall, Council, a couple of years ago worked with Visit Tri-Cities and the others, and Richland and Kennewick, to do kind of a regional sports facilities study. Yeah, and then there came out of that recommendations for each of the cities of what to do, and the fields there at the TCYSA fields were the main focus of the recommendation for improvements, and so we incorporated into this the ability to move forward with some of those recommended changes. If that's the way we move, we're able to move forward with some of those changes without having to terminate this agreement to be able to do that. So the city can initiate changes out there without having to terminate the agreement there. So that's the kind of the summary of the changes, and this 10-year extension.
And I think, Mr. Mayor, if I can piggyback on what Mr. Kubalik has expressed to the council is part of that Visit Tri-Cities study is to determine throughout our region what the assets and strengths of each community was with regard to youth sports and adult sports. Pasco really came out of that study as the soccer community. This is one of the largest, if not the largest, soccer facility in the region, and TCYSA has been pretty good partners with us throughout this entire tenure, and really helps perpetuate the fact that we are the soccer community here for the youth, and just our ideal location in the Northwest brings a lot of economic opportunity for soccer tournaments, as well as the usage of adjacent hotels, restaurants, and gas stations for the economic impact for this facility as well. So just to kind of piggyback a little bit on that.
Right, thank you,
we'll take any
Director
questions
Rashi.
of council.
Any questions or comments from council?
Yeah, this is Councilor Maloney.
Yes.
Just really quickly, Mr. Kubalik and Mr. Rakai, I certainly have heard comments from a number of community members and other organizations that are frustrated by the process of renting it from, a third-party organization instead of from the city directly. I've heard complaints about people being charged for parking when they're trying to go to something else and not attending one of those events, et cetera. So I've heard a number of complaints and comments. Can you talk a little bit more about, I understand that this agreement allows us a little more visibility into the rates, but I guess I'm trying to understand what the value prospect is to the city to have a third party running it when we already have a Parks and Rec group that is already renting out facilities, maintaining facilities, et cetera. What's our benefit from this 10-year extension?
Well, for one, it's they've been running the facility. It was an extension that was part of their agreement. They had the right to this extension, and so they're exercising that right. We have, as is built into this, the ability to give to cancel the agreement with a 2 years notice, if that's what we decide to do. In director, we could move that way, but this is a right that they had in the agreement.
Yeah, and I think as far as that, as Mr. Kubalik said, it is just an extension that's written in the original agreement. We've looked at it as just there's I don't want to say staff capacity, but it just having a third party out there that's soccer centric that can focus on soccer as an area there of expertise really kind of helps, because the city recreation department is staffed to run a number of other programs as well, in addition to the soccer programs and the pool. And so having a third party in there to sort of help out with that was really, I think, the original intent of this. I was not around at the city 25 years ago with this. However, to your complaints that you're hearing through the community, Councilman Maloney, we'll take a look at those and work with TCYSA to see if we can come up with some better answers to those questions as far as this new agreement and extension goes, and bring it back to you next week.
I'd appreciate a little dig into that, because of course, it's easy for me to hear a complaint and seem really big, but I'm very interested in understanding what the more documented record that we have, as a city, and understand that better. But certainly, if this is just part of an extension that's kind of already in line with what they have, what's within their contract, I'm certainly not trying to break a contract. I don't have any particular issue with it. I'm just trying to make sure that we're thinking this through. Mr. Raka, you've especially been on cutting edge in terms of rethinking how we can approach things. I think of the golf course and other facilities as part of that, and was kind of interested in whether a continuation of what we established 25 years ago is going to make sense for us as a city long term, as our demographic has changed and things have changed. So again, if it's an extension to an existing agreement, that's an option that they have available, then I'm certainly not trying to put a stop to that. And I have no particular issue with the organization. I just want to make sure I understand better what the value prospect is for the city for this. So appreciate further information on that when you get a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. And I guess my comment would be kind of in line with the contract that we did with the golf course, last week. we don't get a report. They get to set their own rates. I guess what I'm just trying to do is make sure that we make it equitable for everyone. How do we do that, Mr. Ratkai? With, you know, we're leasing it to them for a certain amount. I think the lease goes for a long time, but you know, obviously in every organization, there's not going to be everybody that's going to be happy. However, I want to make sure that the game stays equitable for everybody,
Sure.
and that they don't, you know, kind of gouge just being the third party and having it for such a long time, and then having to give a 2-year leeway before, if it was chosen by the council to cancel it. But how do we ensure that we keep it equitable for everybody?
Sure, and the city, Mr. Gabalik's staff and my office as well has established a pretty decent relationship with TCYSA. But much like our discussion with the golf course last week, there's a certain market level for these youth programs in the community. And the success of TCYSA remains in the fact that they keep their, you know, dues costs and their league dues and everything low enough so that it ensures participation and continuous usage of the fields in that way. So based upon our relationship with TCYSA, as well as just their model for organization and participation, the prices really just remain at that same level, just for the fact that it really catalyzes a lot of involvement from the community in this aspect there. You know, as we worked through this agreement and this amendment with this organization, we've, you know, further solidified our relationship with TCYSA to come to the table and discuss these as well. So I don't know if there's any reporting mechanisms in there, but we can certainly bring back to the council next week how we would address any changes to that from a significant basis.
So this won't be coming next week for approval, or is it coming next
Yes,
week?
that's our plan. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well,
This is Councilman Serrano. I kind of want to echo everything I've heard here, specifically some of the things that Councilman Maloney raised. You know, I have heard that it is borderline prohibitively expensive to hold tourneys there, such that folks may go even across the river or other parts of Pasco and hold smaller tournaments if necessary. So, Mr. Ratkai, as you mentioned, some type of reporting mechanism. I think it'd be really interesting to see if they reported on how many tournament requests were, I don't want to say denied, but, you know, those tournaments decided to go elsewhere because of cost. And if cost is an issue, whether or not there's anything we can do to assist in that. Because, you know, we've all mentioned this is a soccer community, and we see some phenomenal events there. They're doing a great job, but we got to make sure that we are serving community efficiently and sufficiently. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. Anybody else?
This is Councilmember Roach, and out of curiosity, just wanting to know if TCYS has games anywhere else besides this location in Pasco.
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
And just to, you know, follow up with that, you know, I guess the community concern from parents is that they love the soccer, love the, you know, that recreation is there. You know, the people who live in and around and trying to go through that area becomes just a nightmare, those game days. So on the weekend, basically. So I would be interested in knowing if, you know, they have the ability to spread out to other city parks where there are soccer fields, instead of just that one landlocked position.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. All right, if there's no other questions or comments, then maybe we can get some answers for the vote next week.
We will address the questions and concerns raised by council and bring it back next week.
All right, thank you so
Thanks,
much,
sir.
Director Ratkai and Mr. Kowalik. Thank you for your time and effort. Wow, that's a long list. So now we're miscellaneous council discussion. City Manager Dave Zabel, do you want to
I just have one quick item, this Wednesday, on the 15th, Coffee with a Cop at 22nd and Court, the subway, basically, at 3:30 to 5:30 PM.
Perfect.
So,
All right. Anybody else for miscellaneous discussion? If not, do we have a need for an executive session tonight?
we do not.
Thank you, City Manager Dave Zabel. And with that, if there's no other questions or comments by the council, it is 9:15 and this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.